Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unboxed. We're happy to see you back again, and I'm your host, Pauline. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening to our podcast, we'd really appreciate if you gave us a 5-star rating and review. So I'm going to let our guests today introduce themselves. We'll start off with David. If you want to say hi.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Ray.
Hi, everyone.
Cavani.
Hey.
Delphina.
Hello.
Alicia.
Hi.
Kuzi.
Hi.
Prince.
What is happening?
Yuel.
What's good?
Chizis.
Hi.
And Afra.
Hey.
Okay, so thank you guys for joining us today. So we've been seeing that there's been a lot of protests going on, with Black Lives Matter. So I just wanted to start off with asking you guys what your experiences have been with the protests, especially in Vancouver. So if anyone's been to any of the protests that's been going on, if you can just let us know what your experiences have been like. So we'll start with you, El.
So yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. I think on Sunday, so not necessarily a week ago today, but almost a week ago, last week on Sunday, when I pulled out of my car and I saw the crowd of individuals who came out to support the cause, I was vehemently overwhelmed. And I looked out into the audience and I saw different faces and individuals from different communities, and it was an intersectional crowd. And I saw the individuals who were able, and I heard the individuals who were able to speak, and the rage and the exhaustion and the pain. And you know what? Not for a long time at least, I think for myself, for the first time ever, I felt like, people really came to understand how the Black community, the African Canadian community in our city, that the fallacy that we don't know the pain of what it's not as bad as America, everything is cool here. I think people finally got to understand and really see us and hear us and understand the vexations, the systematic and social vexations that have been exposed to us and that we've undergone our entire existence in Vancouver. I think it was a great opportunity for individuals within our community to go up and to speak and to let it be known what we've been going through, and that we've had enough, and we're not gonna, we haven't tolerated it, but now it's time for white people and non-Black people of color to not tolerate it as well. And it's been uplifting for me, and the Sunday protest, I would have to say specifically, like, it was really heartwarming for me to see the support. However, I want this to be the beginning. What I fear is everyone's gonna go home and things are gonna, the pandemic is gonna continue, and everyone is gonna remain complacent with, yeah, that was great, I made a sign, whoop-de-whoop. But now what? Now is the time for us to amalgamate, to organize, to call out anti-Black racism in every sector of our society, to call out our communities. And again, I don't want to reiterate, but it's not our responsibility. Black folk have been doing the damn thing for as long as we've been alive. Now it's time for non-Black people of color, and it's up to white people to do the work on themselves and to call out anti-Black racism, whether it's systematic or social, themselves. And so it's a great start, but I just have this constant fear now that, whoa, let's not get complacent. This is just the beginning for y'all. We've been doing this, so let's fan this spark into a flame.
Thank you. And Cavani?
Yeah, I agree. I was there at the protest on Sunday as well, and it was very well organized. It was really heartwarming to come and see thousands of people stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and to stand against the systematic oppression of Black people in Canada and in the States and around the world. And I must say, I agree with you, Yuel. Hope I'm not butchering your name, but no, I absolutely agree with you. I feel it's heartwarming to see that we have allies in Canada and in Vancouver, but I have the concern that this standing up against anti-Black racism is a fad, which may be short-lived. So I agree. I want to call on our allies. I want to call on people who are standing up for us now to make this happen all year round. I've been a part of a number of community organizations that have been organizing in this time. In particular, I'm a part of an organization called Black in BC Mutual Aid Collective, and we have been raising funds for Black folks in BC who need access to emergency funds in COVID, right? And on May 25th, we were at about $20,000, and now we're over 100,000. We're approaching 140,000. That happened within 10 days. Now that's excellent. I'm super excited to see that's happening. But then my concern is that what happens next month? What happens after that? So I really think that as Black organizers and Black organizations, we need to build it into our website or build it into whatever platform we're organizing in to try to get non-Black allies to support us all throughout the year. So whether it be sign up for monthly donations or sign up for these monthly subscriptions or anything, so that we can ensure that they're engaged throughout the year and that it's not just a fad.
Yeah, that's a good point. And how have you guys kind of thought about the experience with non-Black people and their support, especially with friends and people who you're close to that are non-Black? Have you seen that majority of the time it's been positive support, or are there some people that you're now starting to rethink in your circle?
Well, thankfully, like within my circle, a lot of the people that I interact with, they understand, I mean, as to the best that they can, they understand the severity of the situation, and they understand also the kind of their role. At a lot of the protests that I've been going to, there's like one of the organizers always makes a point to say that at the end of the day, like this is a struggle that we have been dealing with for a long time, and as allies, like this is a time for you guys to kind of listen and see what you need to do, because obviously, like, you know, for some people this is the first time that they're maybe even hearing about it, or the first time that they're having to deal with it. And so it's an important time for them to be like, okay, what do I need to do, or what do you think you need to do? Because people have been laying the groundwork for this for a long time. This is not anything new to us. But it's like, I feel like when I look into the media or I look into like other platforms, not necessarily like within my own circle, that's when I see kind of the pushback against like what we're doing, or maybe the message is kind of lost. And even with me, like within my own family, I feel like that's been my biggest struggle. I'm Eritrean, which is in East Africa for those who don't know, but it's kind of hard for them. Like my parents aren't from this country. They don't really like know a lot of what's going on. So it's really hard for them to see it. And especially when they get a lot of their news from the media, which is obviously it's not always an accurate portrayal of what is going on. They don't really always understand the message, or they have this like, what is protesting going to even do? Or maybe if people didn't do A, B, and C, then this wouldn't happen to them. So I feel like that's been my biggest struggle in terms of like the people around me. Even going to these protests, especially during Corona, obviously, like they just don't see it as right, but like we have to do the work regardless.
Have you guys had any, like you said, any pushback on the protest, like going to it, and even from people who maybe want to disrupt the protest? I know someone was saying something about someone chanting "All Lives Matter" at one of the protests. Is it?
Sorry, I was just figuring out the raise hand thing. But yeah, I did want to say something about pushback at the protest. I did kind of hear about an incident at the protest yesterday where there was kind of out of nowhere, after the protest had finished and people are kind of dispersing, there was a group of white supremacists that kind of had started harassing a bunch of protesters. And there was one that I know that she's like a 17-year-old girl, and they were kind of just harassing them, calling them that word, and just, you know, doing the most. And basically what the police had done was form a barrier around the people that were harassing them to protect the to protect them from the protesters. And so it had turned into a whole new march where all these people were kind of marching and like kind of just speaking out against the cops that were protecting these people. And it took about 40 minutes for them to do anything about it. And I just found it very ironic that after all of this work that had been done, all of this assembly, like all of this effort that had been put into awareness, and I feel like the cops should be held accountable at a time like this, not just white and non-Black POCs, but I feel like the cops should be on high alert and should be extremely careful with how they respond. But I feel like that was just completely uncalled for, especially at that time in that place. But yeah, as far as pushback goes, I just found that it was really offensive that could even happen at a time like that. But yeah, and as far as allies go, I feel like it's been interesting kind of seeing non-Black people's responses to what's been going on. I feel like there's a lot of different types of allies, where there's some that will actually ask you what they can do and how they can help, and they will listen, they'll take that in and they'll apply it. And there's people that will ask you and then not listen. And they'll kind of just go like, I think this is the right way for me to be an ally, and then just do what they think is right. And in turn, it kind of ends up being worse than, I'd rather someone just not be on our side, honestly, than to be like, oh, like, we're here to help, like, what can we do? And then go like, I don't really want to do it that way. But yeah, I feel like people need to listen at the end of the day. That's how to be an ally. It's the best way.
Prince?
I wanna bounce off of the statement you made about the police and the white supremacists earlier. I just find it funny that when the white supremacists decided to harass the protesters, that the police went and protected the white supremacists rather than protecting the protesters they were harassing. I feel like this is a very big issue in the sense of how non-Black people and non-Black people in general view the Black population. And I see it as this. I see it as they think we are as prone to anger and violence as they are, or more so than. So in a situation like this, if I'm a police officer and someone is harassing somebody, I would want to protect the person being harassed, not the harasser. And this is a problem I feel like we find a lot of in North America, is where whether it's a Black person being killed or a Black person being harassed, people are so quick to jump to the defense, whether it's physically or not. People are so quick to jump to the defense of the white person in the situation that they completely disregard the way the Black person may be feeling within that situation. So I just want to make that a point, that I find that quite funny, that even here in Canada, as people say, there's no racism here, but even here in Canada, we see that the movements of the police match those that we find across the border to the south. In terms of pushback, in terms of protests, I went to both protests, but it's not. I didn't find much pushback in the protests. I found more pushback with other forms of protest, like Blackout Tuesday, where I don't know if for those of you who are watching or for those of you here, Blackout Tuesday was a online protest or a physical protest as well, specifically in the arts community, because I'm a part of the arts community, where people were trying not to stream music, people weren't going to dance classes, people weren't sharing personal things on social media. They were supposed to take the day to educate themselves in order to better help the cause. Now I'm a professional dancer, and one of the biggest blowbacks I had was from another dancer non-Black dancer, who said, it's great that you guys are protesting this way, but I don't feel like I need to protest this way because it messes with my money. Is basically the entirety of her argument. So at this point, when it comes to these protests, I love to see what people are doing, but I don't believe that people truly understand what is necessary for this lifelong fight. This isn't a fight that's going to happen, or as Yul was saying, this is not something that is a day or week long or a month long or a year long thing for us. We've been dealing with this for life. So to see all these people gathered here is a beautiful thing, but I don't know if they truly understand that this is something that is going to take their generation, maybe their children's generation, and maybe their children's children's generation in order to combat. It's all nice for you people to have signs. It's beautiful that people are donating to the cause, but truthfully, I don't believe it yet, because from what I've seen on social media and from some of the blowback I've received from people in terms of even online protests or even something like sharing something on social media, there's been a little blowback in a whole bunch of ways. So I don't believe it, truthfully.
David, go ahead.
The only point that I really wanted to make was that it's really interesting and a little bit sad that it took an actual global pandemic for this to happen. And also another tragedy, because these incidents, this was kind of caused or catalyzed by the killings that happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. And I think that one thing that contributed to this much turnout for the protests was that a lot of people are unemployed. People have more time to actually care and look and pay attention to these issues, because it's not new for us to protest and call out police brutality or injustice or anti-Black racism. Like, these are things that have been going on for centuries. So I think it's a little bit sad that it took a pandemic and it took another Black person getting killed for people to finally say, okay, maybe they have a point. Maybe I'll listen this side. Maybe I'll support. Because that's what leads me to kind of be more pessimistic and feel like maybe, it's not going to be sustainable, because what if things go back to normal? What if things were normal right now? What if we weren't in a pandemic? Will we be seeing the same level of support? I don't think so. So that's kind of the point that I wanted to make.
Ray?
So regarding the protest, I didn't go to the protests yesterday, but just looking on social media from the outside, it was like a lot of people on my social media feed as well went to the protest. It was on the surface level, which, to reiterate most of the points that have been brought up here, it was encouraging to see that at least on a superficial level, there is some sort of camaraderie in terms of the fact that this is an issue that we're all aware of. And again, just to the point that most people said, that being said, the question is, going forward, what does that look like? And also, again, a couple of things. I don't know if we're going to get to that later on the conversation. There's different, this is a multifaceted issue, and protesting is definitely a great step, and it's step number one. But there's so many things that need to be done, either by, as a Black community, us coming together in that sense, and as well as the responsibilities and roles for the non-Black community, as well as humanity as a whole. So, and a perfect example would be because you need to have some sort of like economic and social capital as a society to make this sustainable. So I won't go to that point too much, because I'm assuming there's going to be a question along the lines of that. So I'll just kind of stick to just the question that was asked right now. So like I said, on one level, it was good to see the protests, to see the numbers that came to show out in support. I had a couple of people reach out to me just after the protest, just like, hey, how's it going? And were you able to make it, etc. The other thing, in terms of pushback, I would say in my case, again, not necessarily pushback to the protest or reaction in general. I would say on social media, it's been interesting because this time around, like I've people that know me and people that are, I guess, within my social media sphere, so to speak, they know I've been speaking out on any issues around social justice, and obviously being passionate about social justice when it comes to Black people. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise from anyone on my social media feed that this was coming up. If anything, the conversations I'm engaging in more are less to do with trying to explain to people why Black Matters is better than why it's different from why all lives. Because for me, I've had that conversation over the years. Unlike most Black people, I'm done with that conversation in a sense. If anything, it's kind of interesting. I'm seeing a lot of my non-Black, mostly white allies kind of engage in that conversation kind of amongst themselves. So it's been interesting being a spectator, just kind of like, sometimes I might like something just to almost like giving props to the white ally, like good job, with not necessarily commenting. So it's been an interesting kind of role in that sense. But then the other thing, what I ended up doing was I ended up sharing an example for myself, because a couple of friends and I, we thought about this, and we like some people, as annoying as it is, some people need to see, it needs to happen to someone that they know personally or their family. Because for example, like my wife's white, so her family is basically white, and then there's a lot of family members along that side. And long story short, I shared a story about some police brutality that I faced when I moved, because I lived in the States for a couple of years, like 12 years ago actually, yeah. And so I shared a story, which for me is just like, Black people, that's just, oh yeah, that's just the story that happened that one day, and you kind of internalize it, and to the point, and then you'd realize how much you internalize that kind of situation, and you just kind of like brush it off, but really you're kind of dealing with that trauma internally. Whenever you're faced with a police situation, even if it's just a police officer walking by, you kind of go back to that amongst many other moments that happened. But long story short, it was interesting kind of seeing like it actually impacted a lot of them to realize, oh wow, this could happen to Ray. And again, as annoying as it was for me to be like, really, it took having to for someone that you knew personally. Sometimes as humans, unfortunately, we're kind of like selfish in a sense. So it has to happen to the Black guy that you know, and then hopefully that starts the conversation, because it's a starting point. It's not the end of it.
I think I'm not really sure about the term pushback, kind of, but like non-Black people that I've seen attending protests, I think there is like a strong admiration that I could give them for coming out and really showing their support. But I think now it kind of seems like going to the protests and being woke is trendy. And a lot of the people who did go to the protest yesterday, especially, really liked to take pictures and share what their signs were, and I don't know, it becomes pretty clout oriented. And a lot of the people that I saw post squares the other day kind of just posted the square Black or a hashtag or Blackout Tuesday, and that was it. And I tweeted something a few days back, and I said, if you want to be an ally, create dialogue. And I saw somebody else also put that as a caption, create dialogue. And it makes me angry, because I don't need to create dialogue for anybody. I've been creating my own dialogue, you all can see. But where is the dialogue that non-Black people are creating if this is their kind of thing? I think that like the real pushback comes from people wanting to be woke and show alliance through social media, but not really putting in the effort to like write something out for everyone to really see. And I feel like this is like a frustrating thing, like considering how lovable and how like popular some people are, and they don't want to share that kind of knowledge. Like they want to be, I'm all about it. I'm all about the, Black Lives Matter. I'm all about this movement. But I also get frustrated when I only see people sharing what I share within like a certain time frame that lines up, and it's like you're not taking the time. Like I'm following these people, so this is what I see, but you're not following these people and you're just sharing everything I share. To me, that's not really obtaining knowledge. And I think I'm in this mindset now where I'm like, everyone who is non-Black and is just sharing whatever I'm sharing, I'm thinking like, maybe I'm in some kind of weird mindset, but I'm thinking you are kind of like, this is how you're going to be, and I don't really see anyone really trying hard. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I hope you can tell your children about this, and I hope they learn better. I hope they acknowledge this diversity, because like, I don't know, someone said earlier, it's a generational kind of healing thing. And I feel like you're not people like presently who haven't experienced something, or who are not close to a Black person who has really gone through something and who is really shared in their own narrative. I feel like they're only going to be about what's in their phone. There are so many like resources. There's so many people who are still in school who can search up like all these things like Social Index, Psych Info, like all these things you can look up and just like learn from your own. Like not everything is a hard read. And a lot of these things are like very interesting and like very powerful tools, but people only really want to just look at whatever is being posted on Instagram. If it's a video, if it's an easy read, and people are really saying, this is horrible. Has been happening to Black people for so long. And I'm caught between, like, I feel like my anger comes in two levels. It's the level of, I want to be focused on what's happening in the real world, but I'm also starting to focus more on getting angry by people who are all of a sudden bandwagoning, like this is a brand new thing, like this hasn't been like my life. And I'm always thinking like the pain that all Black people I feel experience is just like, it's like transcending like through all of us, because that's the only image you put on every single Black person, because you don't really care to see like the past or like whatever. You only learned about Black people reading like Underground Railroad to Canada. Like that's the only like knowledge people kind of have. And I'm really just hoping people who really are like donating are not just donating for clout, because now donating has become also like a trend. Like I'm tagging all these people, show me your receipts, show me what you donated. And it's amazing, like give us all your money, that's great. But at the same time, I feel like there should be like a real effort in like taking the time to realize like where your money is going and why it's really needed in this area, rather than just, I want people to see how good I am. That's all I gotta say.
Thanks. Alicia?
I wasn't able to attend the protest because some of my family members are, they have other issues, so I couldn't attend. But for me, the issue was like allyship. I live in an incredibly white community, to the point where like we're the only Black family. And so over the course of this week, I felt my allyship was really odd, because people were texting me and calling me to appease their own white guilt. And then again, it was like this issue of like, okay, why do I have to teach you about these Black issues when you should be going out and doing that on your own? And so for me, that was the biggest issue, was like people were like, I'm so sorry this is happening, are you okay? And I said, the best way to make myself feel better is for you to like go out and educate yourself. And then I was met with silence. And for me, that was the biggest thing. It's like, I saw online so much, such a big community that wasn't Black, that was supporting, and yet in my own world, it was very much like this very passive, just appease your white guilt, check on your one like Black friend, put some money towards a cause, and you're good to go. And for me, that was such a big issue, and it's still ongoing, where I'm like realizing that this has definitely like triggered the traumas of like internalizing what it means to be Black in an incredibly white community. We had even like people like have been dropping off gifts at our door, but like anonymously, like we don't know who it's from. There's like no letters. It's like ice cream, flowers and stuff. Yeah, it's like really fucked up. So we started, I wasn't allowed to swear, but I decided to like create like a sign on our door that just like has like one of the I don't know what website it is anymore. And it's basically like, oh, thank you for dropping off whatever. Go to this website, read at least like 2 articles, watch a movie, and then come back to me and like discuss it. Because for me, I thought like the same, like, cool, protests are great, and like this is a movement that needs to be education, that is something that we need to integrate into our culture. Like, this is not something that you can be like, I feel so bad for you guys. Like, this must really suck. And then you move on with your day. Like, this needs to change your life. And don't put that on me, because that's what's been happening. I've been putting that on. And so for me, I've been having like this grappling with the idea of like allyship, because for me, I haven't seen that support. But yeah, I really thought it was uplifting to see protests and like seeing so many people literally just physically show up, and hopefully we can take that momentum and use it to be something that is much longer than this one moment, but we shall see about that.
Okay, we'll go to Kuzi.
All right, a lot to say. I've tried to organize my thoughts into a few buckets, and so I'll start by saying that this has been really eye-opening, just listening to everybody's perspectives, reflecting on what's happened over the past week and a half, I'd say. Like David was saying, it took a pandemic for the whole world to sit still and actually think about what's going on in Black communities. But for me, what it really forced me to do, because when I watched the video of George Floyd, I sat there and I actually cried, and it was sad because I could see myself in him. I could see my father, I could see my brother, I could see anybody that I know in George Floyd, like on the ground screaming, I can't breathe. And it forced me to go back to kind of the root. That's kind of what has been heavy on my heart, is like, okay, what's the root of all this? Because anytime you see a tragedy, it's usually a symptom of something deeper going on, right? And so I sat down and I kind of, watched documentaries and gathered my thoughts, and I came up with these, I guess, 4 Ps. One of them is this idea of privilege, like what is privilege? Number 2, like economic power, so power just generally, policies, and then the 4th one is policing, right? Because they all kind of tie in together. And I'd love everybody just to kind of think through those 4 Ps, because it's just, when you unravel each one of those things, you realize that there's reasons why we're having problems across all those areas, right? And in my mind, one of the more painful areas is this idea that we don't have, one of the reasons why this is such a painful experience that continues to happen, right, in communities and societies, be it in the States or Canada or anywhere else, like just internationally. One of the reasons why this is a problem is because oftentimes Black people aren't prioritized in policymaking and the decisions. So we talked about institution, like what is an institution? It's basically a group of people that create rules and laws and have a means of achieving an end, right? Like every institution has a goal, right? If the goal is to uplift others while suppressing another group of people, that's a problem, right? And so in my mind, I'm like, well, how do we change these institutions? Because fundamentally, a lot of the institutions we rely on are organized and run by folks that don't look like us. Why? Because a lot of them have economic power, which then translates into privilege, right? Because we live in a capitalist world at the end of the day. This is more of my economics bias coming out, just because that's the area I studied, but I just thought about it in terms of what are the opportunities that we have and what are the problems we face. And the biggest one I see is this idea that we're not treated equally because we're not valued equally by society. And what does this society place value on? They place value on the economic power of people, right? That's kind of what it comes down to. And then I started thinking about, well, where do we excel the most? Well, Black people clearly excel the most in areas like entertainment, right? There's a saying, everybody wants our rhythm, but nobody wants our blues, right? People talk about Black excellence, right? You think about Jay-Z and Beyonce and P. Diddy and all these different people that have excelled in things that require creativity, right? So why is it that we're excellent and we're lauded and everybody was just watching The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, right? Like, why are we loved in all these other areas? But when it comes down to actually making a policy that affects whether or not a policeman can put his knee on your neck for 9 minutes, we're nowhere to be found. Not to say that we haven't been advocating for that, we have. But it's just this idea that the institutions that exist don't factor in the pain of Black people in mind, right? And to me, that bothers me because it means that this problem will keep coming back until we address the actual institutions that we need on our side. Because everybody has, well, supposedly, according to the law, everybody's supposed to have the same rights, right? And the thing that I kept trying to explain to my non-Black friends over the course of the past week is Black people are asking for the same rights as everybody else. We're not asking for anything more, or anything less. And to me, that's the most painful part of this whole experience. It's this idea that you have to fight just to get equal rights. And for the first time in my life, I'm seeing other people start to understand this notion that, oh, okay, well, this is what you're really fighting for, right? You're fighting just to be treated equally, right? This idea of everybody being judged by the content of their character, which is what Martin Luther King said, is something we should all aspire to. But how can we aspire to that if our institutions don't do anything to support us, right? If the police have biases that don't support us. So I could ramble on this forever, but I just wanted to put that out there because that to me has been a lot of the core problem we've been facing. And, you know, to really move forward as a society, we're going to need to address these root problems. And that's going to require people that don't necessarily look like us to take a stand, right? Because we can push and we can pull and we can scream and cry and kick, but I think real change happens in private circles. Real change happens in boardrooms. It happens in people's homes when they're talking to their kids. It happens in areas where we're not present. So that comes down fundamentally to education and non-Black people caring enough to actually sit down with their kids and say, hey, racism is a terrible thing. Everybody is entitled to the same rights. Your Black brothers and sisters are just as valuable as you are as a person. So that's going to take other communities actively educating their own people in order for us to realize this change. Because to me, that's where I see the biggest change happening, is it's in these private circles, the private rooms, private barbecues. All those places are going to be the places where we can affect change. And it's up to us to help shed light on what we're seeing and to unify and advocate. But we're going to need everybody else's support to achieve this. So.
Okay, thank you. And just going off of one of the things you mentioned, police and just in general, that whole system of the fact that a lot of the times they're not representations of people who are in the community. So one of the things that's been going on is people calling for the defunding of the police. So for people who are watching and don't really know what that entails, maybe one of you can explain, just give a little short summary of what that means and if we agree with that or not. So, Prince.
So my knowledge of the slogan defund the police is that to compare to other avenues, as in education, as in the arts, as in sports in underprivileged communities, the police is funded much more in America than any of these other categories. So we see that our police is being militarized, but our kids are undereducated. So when it comes to defunding the police, it is not just taking money away from the police. It is taking money away from the police that is unnecessary and putting it towards other platforms and other places that would help enrich the community rather than, target it.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that point because I was going to bring this up initially when Prince, you were talking in your first comment about at the protest. It was interesting that the police was come to the defense of the group that was doing the aggression, the group that was abusing and harassing protesters. The police came to their defense. So we have to think about why is this so? Why does the police tend to cater to the majority group, the group that is not being oppressed? You have to think about the history of the police in North America and in the United States in specifically, which also influences Canada as well, where the police came about in the United States because to protect private property, and in that case, private property were slaves. So the police came about whenever the slaves would run away to catch them and to ensure that they're brought back to the slave owners. So from that history, we can see that the police was never for the benefit of marginalized groups, right? So, and that history perpetuates till now. So when we say that we need to defund the police, I agree. Absolutely. We need to defund them because it's not just in the States where they're resourced heavily. In Canada as well, I was looking at some statistics. The Vancouver Police Department budget is currently 1/5. There's about 20% of the entire budget for the city of Vancouver. So their budget, their resource at $314 million. Recently, there was a call to reduce the police budget in Vancouver by 1%. And the police pushed back and said that was not possible because, and their words were that because there are going to be a lot of protests coming up, they need that 1% to protect the people protesting. Yet we can see in Prince's example, they weren't protecting us. So the whole thing is really ridiculous when you think about it, right? And then also when we're saying defund the police, we're talking about we need to rethink the purpose of police in our society, right? So everything, the police is not being effective in what they're called to do. So for example, in Canada, we had the case of Regis, where that was the young woman in Ontario that allegedly was murdered by the police. That's the stance that I'm taking, that a lot of people in marginalized communities are taking. Because in summary, what had happened was there was a mental health situation and the police were called to assist. And it ended in the unfortunate death of this young Black woman. The police, in my head, should not be responding to mental health situations, right? There must be a better way that we can organize society so that appropriate groups are called to respond in mental health situations. In my head, the police should not be called in domestic violence situations. So what I'm saying is that it's an opportunity for us to rethink how society is structured and to rethink, do we really need the police for all these things? What we can do is to retrain and to take away the funds from the police and equip other groups and other institutions that are better structured and equipped to meet the needs of to respond to situations the police are clearly effing up and clearly not dealing with appropriately. A lot more to say about some other points, but I want to keep it at defund the police right now, so I reserve those.
Ray?
Oh, wait. Last thing, sorry, is that Black Lives Matter and a lot of other groups, advocacy groups, are currently calling on the city. So I believe there's, whether it be a motion or some sort of formal call, and it's floating around on Facebook and different social media, where Black Lives Matter Vancouver has a list of demands, where they're calling the city to defund the police, to condemn certain actions by the police, and also all the details. I can, send it to David, so that they can probably put in the link of this video. I think it's very important, especially for us as Black folks, to educate ourselves on these calls and to do our best in trying to amplify it.
Thank you. Ray, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah. So actually, yeah, some great points by Kevin there. She touched on a lot of things I was going to mention in terms of defunding the police. I think one other thing too is, as a society, I think at least like this America and North America, well, the States and even Canada, part of the problem is like as a society where it's a very militarized mentality kind of society, which this is some of the things that as a societal level, which kind of ties to what Kuzi said earlier, we need to start rethinking how we come up with what the society looks like. So those are the kind of things that end up giving the police, for example, or the military, having these budgets that are basically skewed towards their favor without necessarily having programs that are looking into how efficient are these programs actually. So I'm not going to belittle the point. I'm not going to beat that point too much. I think you touched on it really well. The one thing I would say though is, so when you're taking, say take funding from this program, the police, and let's call it, and we're looking to move it into other programs that would be of more benefit to the society. So you have, your health, your mental health, community upbuilding, education. I think some things we also need to look out for is, instead of just taking the money and just dumping into the programs and then just hoping it fixes itself, I think we also need to look at those programs as well and look at any implicit biases that may be part of those programs and how we can do those programs better in addition to also how the money is also being spent. So it's kind of like a twofold. So, efficiency in terms of spending money is very important, especially if you want to get the buy-in of like majority in society, because everyone just wants to look at the numbers. What does it look like? So, and it's just also part of being a good steward as a human and as a society as well. So I think definitely when you defund the police, which I personally am in favor of, but there's got to be a program, there's got to be a plan to replace whatever they thought policing was doing, whatever that is, we can debate that to the end. But like I said, those programs now need to be looked at and ensure that the institutionalized racism or biases that are in those programs also need to be flushed out, and as well as looking at the way those programs have been funded and how beneficial those are to the communities that they're looking to serve. So I think sometimes, in the haste with politics and stuff, it's like defund the police, which I'm all for, and then the politicians pass something that's kind of just is not filled with actual details of what that's going to look like. So they get like the yes points of defund police, but they don't actually provide the value that those of us who want them to defund the police want, and then it just kind of goes to the wayside, and then like the wave of society comes back again. It's like, oh well, see, that money was wasted, let's bring back the police stuff. And this is a common occurrence with so many political decisions, especially that are tied to social justice over the years. So I think that's something that's important to kind of look into as well.
David?
I was just going to say that when people talk about defunding the police, I think they also accept that reform won't work. Like they've tried, there have been so many reform policies that have been tried in terms of the police system, and they just haven't worked. For example, there's been a ban on chokeholds actually in a lot of police systems in North America, but we still see police use chokeholds. There's also a lot of studies that have been put out that show that implicit bias training does not work. So even if you try to teach police officers how to not have biases and to treat every situation equally in terms of who is being involved, they still will discriminate against, in terms of how they react to certain situations, whether it's a white person or a black person. So I think at this point, a lot of people are finished with trying to look at reform, and they're saying that, look, the police system is broken. There's no point in trying to fix it. It won't work. Let's defund it. Let's reprioritize the budgets of these police systems and move them to social services, move them to education, and move them into places where they'd be more productive. And so, that's kind of the point that I just want to make, is that it's no more about reform. It's now going into defunding because it just doesn't work anymore.
One scary thing that I learned that David actually shared a link with me was there was these two guys explaining how the police department actually have a set budget for police brutality cases that in terms of like payoffs when they probably get, if say there was a police brutality case and there was no charges brought criminally, and whoever is accusing the police decided to take it to civil court, there is like a set budget of about like $71 million for those type of cases, which I just thought was crazy. And a lot of the times they raise these funds through the stock market. They actually issue bonds, and so kind of like mortgage-backed securities back in 2008, where people were using it as a security vehicle to make more money. People are actually able to invest in these police brutality bonds, and the interest on it is obviously crazy. So they are making money in Wall Street from police brutality cases, about like $18 million of profit in that, which is crazy to me. And I also saw this clip on Fox News where they were showing the trends year after year. Every time there was some outrage and spark in a high profile police brutality case, the stock market would actually increase. So that was really scary, especially because of Fox News's demographic. It's a lot of white, really white supremacists on there too. So if they're seeing, wow, this is profitable, then maybe they might want to vote in someone who's all for force and the militarization of the police. So all those things are just so built into the system that it's scary that it's not just like a social issue, it's also that these people are economically profiting from police brutality. So that was wild to me. But I'll let Afra go next.
That's honestly so shocking to me. I mean, kind of, not really. Like, you kind of expect these kind of atrocities to occur in this country, especially because so many benefit, like everything is run off of money and capitalistic gain. But I was gonna go off of what David was saying. That was one of my points. It's that a lot of times, like, people are outraged because there's not enough training, but at the end of the day, like he said, it doesn't really matter. These are things that are instilled so deeply into these people that regardless of how much training they do, like, it still doesn't really help. You don't see the outcome in a lot of these cases. Like here in Seattle, the police have like almost half, it's almost 50% at this point of the Seattle's budget. We recently had a march, a protest that was specifically for defunding the police. We marched to City Hall where one of our community leaders actually had a meeting with the mayor, and she was presented with like a list of demands, like where we wanted the money to be allocated from that was going to be divested from the police budget. And the mayor had an opportunity to respond, but she didn't address any of the points. She kind of just talked about something that was completely unrelated. She wanted to pacify the crowd, but thankfully, like, a lot of people are starting to open up and like not accept the little things that the government kind of wants to give us to make us happy or whatever. Because a lot of times there are a lot of tactics used to like say, okay, here we did this, like, are you guys going to be happy? Which is why I think a lot of people are against this like propaganda that's going on right now, where people are happy that police are joining in and like kneeling with protesters or hugging protesters. And that's such a dangerous mindset right now, because like we've seen, they will kneel with you 1 second and they're tear gassing the crowd the next. So I think it is really important, like Ray was talking about, we need to have kind of an objective when we are talking about defunding the police and which departments we want the money to go to. Because right now, like, they're getting millions, and in some cases, in LA, it's almost $3 billion, which is 53% of the budget, which is just like, that's so much money and teachers don't have enough supplies to even teach their kids. Like, there's some teachers who are having to pay out of their own pocket just so like their students can have supplies. Or like even with housing, there's people, like, that was one of our main points, is that the housing in our city right now is really bad, whether it's with gentrification or like our mayor is doing a lot of like sweeps where she's trying to she's kind of affecting homelessness in a really negative way. They've like added spokes in a lot of places so people can't lay down even outside, or they're just like tossing all of their like their belongings, like the only thing that they actually have. So we're trying to be really objective about what exactly we want the money to go to, but they're not really responding well yet, which is why obviously we're continuing to go on. And we have a meeting like this week. I think she has to present our budget for it. So we'll see, like, hopefully things do change. But right now, like, the police are continuing to get away with it.
Okay, Prince?
I feel like a very big reason why the police reform has really failed is because people don't understand the severity of police brutality. You know, I saw this post up, and one of my cousin, my direct blood cousin, is a doctor, and I had a conversation with him as well, and he was just mentioning to me, for medical doctors malpractice, your license is stripped away, you face a medical court, you could go to jail. There are things that happen right away. I had a very good talk with one of my really, really good friends in Saudi Arabia, And he was just explaining to me the way the police work there, and he went to school over here in Canada, and he was just explaining to me the difference between the way it works. And he was saying he had an encounter with the police officer, and in the process of him being booked for something he did not do, the police officer lied. And keep in mind, Saudi Arabia in many ways is a lot more extremist than we are here in North America. But once it was found out that the police officer lied, he was sentenced to death. He was sentenced to be executed. Keep in mind, he was not executed. He did not end up being executed. But he was just explaining to me that when you swear to protect and serve the people, that is your duty. If you fail to protect and serve the people and instead incite anger or harm the people, or harm those, or protect those, harming the people, that is, they don't stand for that. And that is grounds for capital punishment there. So I'm looking at that compared to police officers here in North America or in America, where you can see them being shot or see them shooting somebody on video in cold blood, and somehow, some way, excuses are still made about why that person does things. And I feel like it's mostly seen here in North America versus anywhere else in the world, because from a lot of the people I have spoken to, the government does not tolerate when police go out of line outside of their duties. And there's a board for things like that, where if a police officer does go outside or out of line, they have a board where police officers can be reviewed, and police officers do go on trial for their actions. I believe we do have something like that here in Canada as well. But for some reason, it is not implemented enough here and not executed at all in America. So I feel like when we talk about police reform, if police reform is an option, it needs to be a little bit more extreme than we think of just bringing in someone to talk to police officers about how you shouldn't treat a black man different than a white man, than an Asian man, than a Latinx man. I feel like it needs to be as severe as possible, because again, these people have taken an oath to protect and serve, and anything out of that is malpractice.
Something else I was thinking too in terms of defunding the police was, if we got more creative with this, like if we really think about what society could look like, and this came to my mind when I listened to that podcast, which I shared in the chat, and hopefully we shared as a larger resource, was the idea that if we directed the funds elsewhere, certain things wouldn't need to be criminalized. So for example, I'm shocked to hear that the budget in some states for police in the States is 50% of a city. Like, to me, that's unfathomable. You mean half of your money is going towards the police, wherein, think about if you directed some of that money towards making transit free. You know what I mean? Then you wouldn't need police to monitor the transit station. You wouldn't need police, and therefore an activity is not criminalized. So therefore you're phasing them out. And that approach can be applied in so many different sectors of society. I feel like as a society, we've become comfortable with the idea of criminalization. And the idea of criminalization, who does that impact the most? Black and brown bodies, marginalized communities. So yeah, this is, as you know, back to Kuzi's point, yeah, the system wasn't built for us. The institutions were made with us in mind, because, and again, the criminalization of us equates to money, which goes into the hands of white people. So yeah.
Good point. And also just going back to when we were discussing the protests as well, and one of the points that was brought up is to make all these changes that we're pushing for sustainable in the long run, with allies and also within our circles as well. So is there someone that can speak to how we can go about doing that, what we can push for to make all these changes that we're calling for more sustainable? I'll start with you, Ayo.
Thank you. So I've been thinking a lot. I've been conducting a lot of introspection, and also thinking a lot about how anti-Black racism has affected two other really important people in my life, like my brother who passed away and my little sister. My mom and dad immigrated to Canada for a better life for all of us. I think that's a story that a lot of people know and understand. My brother was an amazing hockey player. He went to play college hockey at the age of 16, and he would, whenever he would be on the ice and he would get a hat trick or score a lot or give a lot of assists, the other coach on like opposing teams of majority white teams would yell out for everyone to hear, "Get that N-word, get that N-word, make sure he doesn't score again." And I remember growing up within the acting industry, going to auditions and being signed to agencies and experiencing anti-Black racism, and my sister as well. And so I'm an individual who sometimes, I'm not necessarily a shy person, but sometimes when I need to get my thoughts in order, I write. And that my pen has been my best friend. And I thought if I could speak and if I could say something, and it would absolutely happen, what would I say? And so I'll read it super quickly. It's not too long. But with regards to anti-Black racism in Vancouver, I simply just said, to the hockey teams prevalent in the greater Vancouver area, what will you do to ensure that the Black hockey players on your team are in an environment where anti-Black racism is not welcome or tolerated? To the acting and modeling agencies of Vancouver, what will you do to ensure that your Black actors, models, artists, and talent are in an environment where their Blackness is celebrated and where they have the same access to auditions, complex roles, and hair and makeup services that your white talent does? To the school curriculum of British Columbia, specifically to British Columbia's Minister of Education, Rob Fleming, what will you do to ensure that Black history, not just Black History Month, is implemented into the educational curriculum for the schools of our province? What will you do to ensure that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Angela Davis, Nelson Mandela, LGBTQIA legend and icon Marsha P. Johnson, and Canadian hero Viola Desmond are studied and celebrated in our education system? One of the greatest tools that we can use to dismantle anti-Black racism and to ensure that all understand that Black Lives Matter is to celebrate Black history and Black historians in our school system. Rob Fleming in British Columbia, education is key. It's time you do your part to make sure that British Columbia and subsequently all of Canada understands that Black lives matter. And I wrote all of this on the foundation of being exhausted and being tired. Anti-Black racism, I keep reiterating this because this is something I will always, my emotions and passions ardent. This is not anti-Black racism and uprooting it and dismantling it. It's not our responsibility. It's non-Black people of color's responsibility, white people's responsibility. You cannot start a fire and then claim Black people as your firefighters. That's the most ludicrous thing I simply can't wrap my brain around it. And so when I wrote all of that, I essentially, to sum it all up, it's your mess, clean this shit up. It's not up for us. And I can only wish that our real allies, our real white allies and our real non-Black people of color allies will listen to these words and do their part in making sure that there's systematic and social change. So yeah.
I think to Yo's point, he said it very eloquently, but the biggest thing that stood out to me is just legislation. If you want the education system to change, legislate it. If you want policemen to stop killing Black lives, legislate against it. Make sure that they go to jail. Make sure that they get life sentences against them if they commit crimes and atrocities against black bodies. For a lot of the problems that we see right now at institutions, we need laws that are in our favor. Things that actively say, hey, you know what, if this happens to a Black person, then there's a crime, there's a punishment associated with this, right? And then I think a further step even beyond that is we need to start actively involving our non-Black friends, allies in these wider conversations. And beyond the marches and everything, I think we need focus groups, and we also need groups that focus on economic inclusion. Because for me, like, the biggest thing that can change some of the problems that we face consistently in society is this idea of creating opportunities, right? Most people were able to stop and think about this pandemic because a lot of them were either unemployed or forced to be at home, right? If people were out there, working and doing all these other things, maybe they wouldn't have spent as much time thinking about the plight of Black people, right? So my whole thing is we want to sort of reverse this idea that people only think about this when they've got nothing else to do. They should be thinking about this over the course of their daily lives. So that goes to economic inclusion. And economic inclusion comes from creating opportunities. So I posted a couple of articles in the group, but if you look up access and funding and different things like that, these are some of the biggest things I think the Black community needs, right? We need fair access, right? I know Pauline works in banking. We need fair access, right, to loans and all these other things. If a Black person has a great idea, let's help them get off the ground, right? If somebody wants to, create a community organization, they should get access to support and funding and grants and things like that. So there needs to be wider access to these things, because if we're able to create pockets of prosperity in our societies, people will see that, right? And they'll start to support more, right? So it's kind of like that circular wheel. The more progress we make, the more people support, and the more people support, the more progress we make, right? So that's kind of how I think about this. We need to start that hamster wheel of just getting more opportunities coming our way, because unless we do that, we're going to be talking about similar problems 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? And we can't afford that. We need to be the change that we want to see, right? And so we need to hold our politicians accountable to the laws, right, and the economic inclusion we promote. And another thing I was going to say just on that last point about economic inclusion is vote with your dollars. Shop at a Black business, right? Go and actually support the people that look like you, because at the end of the day, the money, every dollar you spend is a reflection of what you value, right? So vote with your feet, vote with your dollars, and that's ultimately how you start to get real change. Because if you affect somebody's bottom line, they'll listen to you, right? And Black people have numbers. We may not be the most populous in the country, but we've got numbers, and our dollars count. So vote with your feet, vote with your dollars, right? And keep your politicians accountable to laws. Those are the things I think we should prioritize right now.
Yeah, and I just want to say something to add on to that. And I think Black people, we have a lot of influence even in our little circles. Like, people a lot of the time look to us for what's cool or trendy. And I think when we promote things that come from us, people are more inclined to also put their dollars into us. So we're running short on time, so I'll just have Prince, I think you had your hand up as the last point.
So I just want to bounce off of what Kuzi is saying, and also kind of what Yuel is saying. I feel like in order for real, lasting change to come, one cannot exist without the other. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of the time we put pressure on politics to make change, and laws alone to make change. But the reason why laws are in place is because of the ethics of the people. You know what I mean? Laws are put into power, things are put into place to reflect the way a group of people want to move forward. At the beginning of this country, those people were white people. You know what I mean? The laws were put into place in order to reflect the ethics of white people. And it is not until very, very recently where the ethics and beliefs of Black people were included in that equation. So I don't want to only put it on getting into legislation, because there are laws in place now that should protect all people that do not protect all people. Right. So I believe also education, as Yuel was saying, is also very, very, very key, because if you're able to influence the ethics of a community, then the politics will reflect that. Just real quick.
Yeah, great note to end on. So we'll conclude it here. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and opinions on the topic that we raised today. And thank you to everyone who has been watching or listening to this episode. Be sure to give this video a like or comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Also, follow us on social media, either on Instagram or Facebook at unboxedshow. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.